Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for worshiping with us. I know I got to meet a few of you who are here for the first time. I'm Matt Miofsky. I'm the pastor here at the Gathering, and we're really glad that you came to check us out in worship. Megan, I did the thing you were joking about. I gave myself a friendship bracelet out in the lobby, and then they told me, you can't have one of those. They're for the people. And there was only 100 of them. I don't know if y'all know this, and they cost money apparently. And now there are only 99 because I just took one so that I could look like I was someone. How much do they cost? How much? Okay. Cool. There. All right, I'm paid. Witness. We're talking about friendship, obviously, and I think any good relationship in our life, there's like testing points in those relationships. Here's what I mean by that. No matter how much you like or respect somebody, no matter how much you love them, how close you are, how much you want to be their friend, whatever it is, at some moment, every human being in your life will disappoint you. This is a human truth. Now, I'm not trying to start off on a negative. This is just true about life. And it may happen in some big way, but more often than not, it's just something small. They're annoying. They don't show up the way you want them to show up. They say something that seems a little off. They don't do the thing that you really wish they would do as your friend. And in that moment, when people disappoint you, when people let you down, we all have a decision to make. And the decision is essentially this: is this person really worth it? Or is it better to just move on? And I think this is true really in any kind of significant relationship. This is true in a romantic relationship. It can be true in marriages, certainly with coworkers or a boss. Like, is it worth getting through this stuff? But I think it's especially true with friends because of something I said in week one. Friends are the people we get to choose. And so it stands to reason that friends are also the people we get to unchoose, right? And I think that how we react in that moment when people disappoint us, when people let us down, is really important for whether or not we're going to get good at forming significant friendships in our life. So as Megan said, today we're continuing this series that, every once in a while I preach a series that I really need to hear, and this is one of those series that's been personally challenging. It's practical. I'm talking about not just the idea that we need significant friendships. I think most of us find that deep down we want that, but how do we actually get there? How do we build lasting, significant friendships in our life? And so a few weeks ago, we talked about time, the importance of investing time, that friendships take time to form. Last week, we talked about vulnerability. We had a testimony about needing to be real with people if we want to grow closer to them. But today, I'm going to move on to a third key ingredient, I think, that we need if we want to get to a place of meaningful friendship with people. And that ingredient is really learning how to get through seasons of frustration or disappointment. And the religious word that I would use, the faith word, is really the art of forgiveness. I think here's what I mean by this. Here's my concern. We live in a fairly disposable world. And what I mean by that is I think we live in a world where we have relatively short relationships with anything in our life. You have a TV and it breaks. You don't fix a TV anymore. You do what? You just get a new one, right? If you have the iPhone whatever, even if it works perfectly fine, the 11 just came out. And I can summarize every Apple announcement with this, better camera, longer battery life. Well, I want that. So the new one's got, 18 cameras or something. I want that one. So 2 years. We do this with all sorts of things in our life. You don't like a sofa anymore. There's IKEA right down the road. Just get a new sofa. So we have a relatively short relationship with things. We don't have things very long. And the idea is if we're tired of it, if it's no longer making us happy, if it doesn't suit our needs anymore, get rid of that one and just get something else. And that's just kind of the world we live in. Well, the problem is I think that's actually that mentality has actually impacted the way that we're in relationship with one another. And I mean this about any relationship in our lives. We live in a world where I think we bring that mentality that even relationships are fairly disposable. And so I see certain, romantic relationships fall into this, marriages sometimes, certainly bosses, coworkers, but I think this is especially true, like I said, with our friends. And so in other words, if people aren't making you happy anymore, if they're disappointing you, if they're letting you down, if it stops being fun, or if they stop being useful, if they stop really being the kind of person that gives you energy every time you're around them, it's really easy to say, you know what, it's time for me to, that was good for a season, but it's time to move on to something new. And the truth is, I actually understand why we do this. I mean, after all, life is way too short to deal with crummy people. I mean, life is way too short to be with people who chronically sort of drain you and let you down. And I've even stood up here on the stage, I think, and taught and told you, hey, look, do not have chronically, draining people in your life. Move on to other people that are worth investing in. And in general, I wholeheartedly believe that we don't need to be around chronically draining people. But here's the flip side of that. We have to be careful, because if we take that mentality into every single relationship in our life, that every single time a relationship gets a little difficult or a friendship gets hard, if every single time that pops up, we move on to the next thing, then here's what will happen. You will find that in your life, you have a series of close friends, but you don't ever really have a long-lasting, significant friendship that I think a lot of us crave. Here's the hard reality about people, if you haven't discovered it. People, even your friends, aren't perfect. And what that means is that at some point, they're going to do things that you don't love. They're going to show up in a way that disappoints you. They're going to do something behind your back that really lets you down. And if we want meaningful friendships, then we have to decide which people are worth it. And we have to be willing to actually go through those difficult seasons, showing grace, even practicing the art of forgiveness. Of course, this idea of grace and forgiveness isn't a big surprise to those of you who've been around the church a while. I mean, these are words we use all the time. They're, of course, central to Jesus' ministry, right? I mean, Jesus came teaching grace, teaching forgiveness. That word forgiveness is embedded in the Lord's Prayer. We say it every week, forgive other people. Certainly, it was part of Jesus' own ministry. A lot of his parables were centered around the idea of forgiveness. It was central to how we understand his death on the cross and his resurrection. I mean, in so many ways, forgiveness kind of sits right at the center of the Gospels. But I think what we often forget is that Jesus didn't just teach about this as some abstract thing, but he actually had to practice it. He had to model it in his friendships. And I think we forget that Jesus really did have friends. And he had to figure out, like anybody else has to figure out, how do you deal with friends who don't always do the things that you want them to do? And maybe is this nowhere better illustrated than in his friendship with Simon Peter. I think by most accounts we can say that Simon Peter was Jesus' best friend. And Jesus similarly was Peter's best friend. And we forget that Peter didn't just hang around Jesus as like a teacher during the day or something, but these two guys spent more time around each other than probably anyone else in their life. For 3 years, they probably woke up and they're the first person that each talked to in the morning. They traveled throughout the day together. At night, they probably sat around and over meals and afterwards just talking about life and stuff. And they're probably the last person that they each said goodnight to before they went off to sleep. I mean, Peter and Jesus spent an enormous amount of time together. And yet what's interesting, if you pay attention to the Gospels, is things weren't always great between these two besties. In fact, they often got into it. And I want to read you one example of this. They're traveling, and I'll set the context up a little bit after I read it. But here's an instance of just one of many moments where Peter and Jesus, well, their friendship wasn't quite working the way they wanted it to. Let me read this to you. This is Matthew chapter 16, verse 22. It says this: "Then Peter took a hold of Jesus and scolding him, began to correct him. 'God forbid, Lord, this won't happen to you.' But Jesus turned to Peter and said, 'Get behind me, Satan. You are a stone that could make me stumble, for you're not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts.'" Now I'm going to stop there. Now, there's a whole theological explanation for this that we could get into. Most of the time I preach, I focus on that. But for today, I just want you to note that this was a conversation between two friends. And check this out. I mean, Jesus, here's the setting for it. Jesus had begun to teach things that Simon Peter really didn't like. Peter was like, I didn't sign up for this teaching, and I don't know what's going on. And finally on this day, he decides he has to confront Jesus about it. Like, this teaching is just not good. And so he goes to Jesus, and I have no doubt that Peter went with the best of intentions. Like, hey, Jesus, this is for your own good that I'm trying to tell you this. But the scripture says that it came off as scolding. So here's Peter scolding Jesus. I don't know if you've ever had a friend who scolded you, tried to make you feel bad for something. But then Jesus obviously wasn't having any of it. I mean, this is the guy who's supposed to be all about love, grace, forgiveness. But what does he do? I mean, he just comes right out in the first sentence and calls him Satan. I mean, that's tough between two friends, right? He says, you know, you are a stone that is constantly making me stumble. Like, why do I have you in my life? I mean, Jesus pulls no punches and comes right back at Peter. And it's almost comical when you think about this as a conversation between two friends. I was thinking a lot in the past week, like, what happened after this? I mean, obviously this was a tense interchange. I mean, Peter thought he was trying to be helpful. Jesus obviously thought Peter didn't get it. Now, we don't know what that evening's conversation was like, but we know that they must have hashed it out. They must have had words. Maybe Peter apologized to Jesus. Maybe Jesus apologized to Peter. Hey, sorry for calling you Satan and all that. I mean, maybe they both apologized to each other. We don't know. We don't have access to what they said. But what we do know is somehow the next day they were okay because they kept journeying together. Somehow something must have been said. These two friends, you know, had to sit down and figure out, hey, why did you do what you did? Hey, this is where I was coming from. They must have hashed it out in some way. And the truth is, the next day they kept journeying together and their relationship grew because of it. I don't think it's an accident that just a little bit after this, Jesus and Peter decide to teach people about forgiveness. Jesus offers this almost right after this instance happened. This is Matthew just a little bit later in Matthew 18, verse 21. It says, then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, like theoretically speaking, how many times should I forgive you? I mean, my brother or sister who sins against me. Should I forgive as many as 7 times? And Jesus said, not just 7 times, but rather, 77 times. In other words, here's Jesus and Peter saying, hey, what we went through right there, like, this is what you're gonna have to do with people. And again, I don't really think they're talking about like the big heinous kinds of forgiveness. At least that's not what I'm talking about here. But here I think what Jesus is talking about is just the everyday ways in which people annoy you, hurt you, let you down, disappoint you. It's almost like Jesus is saying, look, if you really want to have relationships with people, if you want to have friendships with people, then you have just got to learn how to show a little bit of grace with folks. You've got to learn the art of forgiveness. Now, I mean, we're not Peter and Jesus exactly. But in some ways, I think what Jesus is saying here is true for all of us, that we can learn something about their own friendship, the friendship between Peter and Jesus, I think teaches us something about if we really want to have good friends, if we want to have friends that remain so over a long period of time, if we want to even get to the point where we can call someone a close friend, then we've got to do what Jesus is suggesting here. Showing grace, offering forgiveness, learning to reconcile and even sometimes to apologize are essential to long-lasting deep friendships. In fact, I'm going to say that again. I'm going to put it up on the screen. This is what I want you to remember, if anything, today, that showing grace, offering forgiveness, even learning to reconcile and sometimes apologize, that it's absolutely essential to long-lasting deep friendships. If you can't do these things, then you're going to find it difficult to have the kind of relationships that I think a lot of us crave. And I know that this uses a lot of like really religious sounding words. So what I want to do is just break those down in a really applicable way. What do I mean when I say these things? Well, let's start with grace. My working definition of grace for the purposes of today is grace is just being a little bit more flexible with imperfect people. Okay, grace is just showing a little more flexibility with imperfect people. And I think this is especially important in the early days of a friendship. Some of you have like really high standards. You get annoyed really easily. And you cut people out of your life way too soon simply because you can't get past something early on in a relationship. But here's the thing, learning another person, learning a person's habits, learning their strengths, their weaknesses, it requires an ability to show a little flexibility and a little grace to even see if maybe there's a potential friendship here. I remember the first time I met someone who went on to become one of my closest friends. Today he's one of my closest friends. And the truth is, the first time I met him, I did not like him. I thought he was kind of an idiot, to be honest. And I say that with all sorts of love. If he's listening to my sermon online today, thankfully I've actually told him this since that point. I mean, I did. It was in a conference. He was talking all the time. I thought he talked too much. I thought what he was saying wasn't that intelligent sounding. I mean, I just thought he was kind of a dope. And I met him one-on-one, and that didn't improve things. I mean, I thought the same thing. And then he invited me to go to lunch, and I almost didn't do it. I almost thought, no, forget this guy. And I said, well, sure. We went to lunch, and at lunch, I began to learn that there was this whole other side to him, and that one day that I met him, something was going on. But we began a friendship that to this day has become he's one of my closest friends that I have. I was thinking back on that, and if in the beginning I would have shut that down, just because of the way he showed up that first time, then I would have lost access or maybe the ability to form one of the closest friendships that I have. What I'm trying to say is, guys, with one another, show a little bit of grace. Realize that people are imperfect people. Don't make rash decisions about other people. Give friendships a chance to form by showing grace in the early stages. We all have quirks. We all get annoying. We all have to learn other people, or we all have bad days. Grace is an essential element of just giving some space for relationships to form in your life. Forgiveness is the second word in that. What I mean by forgiveness when it comes to relationships is just this. Forgiveness is going a step further. And for the purposes of friendship, I really think forgiveness is about letting go of the anger that we sometimes form toward one another. And again, here I'm not really talking about people who do these egregious, huge, dramatic things against you, but I'm talking about kind of the everyday things that it's easy for us to get angry about when it comes to friends. I think this is so important because you all are good at getting mad and then just letting it fester, And the problem is, we're going to get mad with people that we like. People say dumb things. They don't do things we want them to do. They disappoint us. Sometimes they gossip behind our back. And it's worth getting angry. That's cool. You can get angry. But then what a lot of us do is we get angry. We don't go talk to the person. We just sit with our anger. Chances are we even go to other friends and say, can you believe what so-and-so did? And then our anger grows, and it grows, and it grows, and it just kind of stays there lodged between what otherwise could be a good friendship. All of a sudden, anger, we allow it to grow. See, here's the thing about anger. You can either feed anger or you can starve anger. It's not bad to have it, but you can either feed it or you can starve it. And a lot of times when it comes to friendships, we let anger grow. We actually feed it. And it gets in the way of us being able to have a significant friendship with somebody. I was talking to someone recently, and they told me that they have two really good friends who don't get along. And so now, when they want to have a party or a holiday party or something, they have two different parties. And on the first night, they can invite one friend. On the second night, they can invite the other friend. And I said, that's insane. I said, what happened between these two people that they so hate each other? And the person said to me, you know what, I don't even remember. I don't think they even remember. They just know that they don't like each other now. They've let that anger define their relationship. Teenagers, for any of you who are in the room, I actually appreciate you when it comes to this. I have 3 middle school, high schoolers. What I noticed about middle schoolers is, they make friendships fast and then they get mad fast. Friendships are always shifting and changing, and it's like the stock market. I have to ask every day, who's up and down. But here's what I love, teenagers, about you, is I think that you actually are able to get over anger a lot easier than some of your parents. Like, you're able to realize that sometimes friends do stupid things and you get mad at them, but then you can let go of it. And I wish sometimes as adults we could learn the same thing. Adults could learn from you. It's okay, guys, to get angry, with people that are our friends, but when we just let anger sit there, when we feed it by talking about our anger to other people, then what can happen is that anger can become a barrier to ever kind of getting over it and continuing on to having a meaningful friendship with that person. I'm going to move on to the third word. The third word in that sentence is reconciliation. And I think that sometimes close relationships are going to require what I call reconciliation. Reconciliation is really just this. Reconciliation is sitting down to fix something that's broken. That's what reconciliation is. It's just repairing something that's broken. And here's the thing, if you really want meaningful relationships with other people, at some point they're going to do something that crosses the line, and it's going to put a strain on your relationship. Something's going to open up that unless you go and talk to them about it, it's not ever going to get any better. And we need to be able to go to people that have disappointed us, that have hurt us, and actually be able to talk to them about things that they're doing that are making us struggle. Now, I know that there's a lot of us who do mental math and say, I have to do that with certain people in my life. I don't want to have to do that with friends. I don't want to have hard conversations with people that I choose to be around. And now some of you remember last year I preached a whole series called Fight or Flight, how bad we are at dealing with disagreement. And again, I get it, but here's the thing. You have to figure out the people in your life that are worth it. And if there's people in your life that are worth it, if there's friends that are worth it, then at some point, I think in every relationship, if you really want it to be the kind of thing we crave, you have to be willing to go to them and say, hey, something's not working and I want to talk to you about it. My son Caleb loves to always remind us around the house that the ones he's closest to are the ones that he can get mad at. That's usually when he's mad at one of us. But I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, the people that I'm the closest with are the ones that I've gotten to a place where it's okay for me to say, hey, you're frustrating me. Hey, that's annoying. Hey, can you stop doing that? I mean, I think in some weird way, we all actually crave getting to that point. The problem is we don't ever want to do the things that get us there. Here's how you get to the point where you can be upset and it's okay with another person. It means that you're willing to sit down when stuff happens and actually talk it out. Guys, your friends are not always going to get it right, and sometimes they're going to get it really wrong. That doesn't mean that they aren't worth investing in. But we need to be wise about the relationships that are fundamentally good, that are fundamentally worth fighting for. Then we need to get good at being willing to sit down with them. Because if you do this, I promise that if you are able to sit down with a friend that's worth it and have a hard conversation, oftentimes on the other side of that, you find that your friendship actually grows through that. And then finally, I can't let you go without the last word in that sentence. The last word is, every once in a while, you're the one that needs to do the apologizing. And for those of you who don't understand an apology, this is what an apology is. Please put it on the screen. An apology is saying you're sorry. Do you all know? Try this with me. Are you ready? I want you to say on the count of 3, I'm sorry. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yes, you can do it. That's what an apology is. Don't say anything beyond it. Don't say, I'm sorry you felt that way. That's not an apology. That's passive aggressive. I'm sorry that me hurting you hurt your feelings so bad. Don't do that. Just say, I'm sorry. Here's the thing, you aren't perfect people either. And sometimes we do things and we screw up. And I see a lot of us taking a lot of energy to justify why we did something that hurt one of our friends, when it would be a whole lot easier if sometimes we would just own that maybe we didn't handle it great. And every once in a while, go to your friends and say, hey, I'm really sorry for that. That was insensitive. I wasn't thinking. I was having a bad day. I didn't think about how it would impact you. Hey, I'm sorry. The power of those words to not only heal something that's stressed, but to actually, move you closer in friendship is so amazingly powerful, and it's so easy to do. Just remember this. If there's something hanging out there right now, like a friend's angry at you and maybe an apology is due, but you just really think you were justified, I just want you to think about this. Being right isn't nearly as valuable as having a meaningful friendship. It's just not. Being right isn't near as powerful as having a meaningful friendship. So every once in a while, be willing to say you're sorry, own some stuff. It's really powerful. Guys, really in closing, here's what I'm trying to push on. In a world where it is really easy to say, this person's not worth it, this person's not worth it, I don't want to deal with this kind of stuff, every once in a while you're going to have to pick the friendships that are worth it, that are fundamentally good, and there's going to be hard seasons. There's going to be everyday disappointments, there's going to be things that people do to annoy you, but showing grace, offering forgiveness, maybe even occasionally having to sit down and reconcile something, and sometimes even apologizing. These are things that you need to be willing to do if you want meaningful friendships, the kind that I think most of us crave. And so today you can probably imagine what I want to challenge you to do. Today I suspect that in the landscape of your relationships, whether it's early friends or people you've been friends with a long time, maybe one of those 4 things you need to kind of work on this week. Maybe you're short with people and you just need to show a little bit more grace with the people in your life, realizing that people are imperfect. This is who people are. Maybe some of you have anger toward others that maybe today it's just time to let go of that. Just remove it as being an obstacle anymore and just move on. Just let it go. Maybe for some of you it's more significant. Some reconciliation is needed and you need to decide whether a relationship is worth just sitting down with the person and actually telling them what it is that's going on in the hopes that your relationship or friendship could actually grow on the other side of that. Maybe some of you, as you sit here today, just owe someone a I'm sorry so that your friendship can continue to move on. As we close today, I want you to think about what relationships, maybe what friendship in your life do you need to practice one of those 4 things? And I'm going to close with some words that come from one of Paul's letters. And the funny thing is we read this passage a lot at weddings. It wasn't really written between 2 people who are getting married. It was really written about people, friends. That's actually who it was written for. So I want you to think about the words of Paul. I'm going to invite you to bow your heads and just hear these words really as our closing prayer. Paul says this: therefore, as God's choice, holy and loved, put on compassion, put on kindness and humility and gentleness and patience, and be tolerant with each other. If someone has a complaint against anyone, forgive each other, as the Lord forgave you. Holy God, today, you know those of us that need to work on these things in our life. You know that we need to show a little bit more grace. You know those of us who maybe are holding on to anger that it's time to let go of. Some of us need to sit down and maybe have a hard conversation or just say, I'm sorry. And God, we resist this so much. And so today, I pray that you would send us your Holy Spirit. Help us to do the things for others that you so freely and so often have to do with us. I pray that you would give us that wisdom to know which relationships are worth it and the courage to show grace and offer forgiveness. We pray these things in the name of the one who showed us unlimited grace and incredible forgiveness, Jesus Christ our Lord. And together God's people said, amen.